This is a conversation with Joshua Schenk, who is a partner at InfoStrategies and the former director of the Metro Office of Extraordinary Innovation. He has a new book that is forthcoming spring of 2026 called New Tricks for Old Bureaucracies. We're going to get into a little bit of that, his time at Metro, some insights, and all that good stuff. So just to start, if you want to summarize very broadly, what are the lessons that you, very, very distilled, that you're hoping to impart with the book? Or if you had to distill it into maybe, a few key lessons.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that I would highlight overall that everyone at this conference in particular should know. One is that technology does not fix processes, right? And I talk about that a lot. You can have a broken process and bring in new technology and think that that's going to be the solution to fixing that broken process. You are almost certainly going to be wrong. Most of the time, in order to fix a broken process, you have to work through what that process is and maybe even start from scratch and design it over again rather than just trying to bring in a technology to speed it, because that's unlikely to work. And then another important, I think, takeaway from the book is that the way that change happens in the public sector is through relationships, right? The change does not happen because you found the new toy, and change does not happen because you had a great idea. Change happens because you build relationships with people and you, to use a term that I heard in another session, co-create with them to develop solutions to challenging problems. That is actually how we achieved success. We did not achieve success by being the idea people or the technology people or the loudest people, although sometimes we were all of those, but we did do it when we were actually able to build relationships.
I think that's an interesting point to make at a conference full of shiny toys. But I think it's well taken, right? And I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to early on what some of those appealing technologies were, the ways that maybe they worked, the ways that maybe you were overly ambitious, and kind of the long-term legacy of technologies that you championed in your time at Metro.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the technologies that we saw that we were really excited about that we couldn't make any progress on were in the area of fair payment, right? And just to give you an idea of why we faced tremendous barriers, and it's come a long way. Los Angeles, for those of you who took Metro to get here like I did, you probably used your phone. You know, it was probably pretty easy. That when I started in 2015, that was not the case. But even so, Metro is still behind a lot of other transit agencies in that they don't have open payment. And when we first started, we thought like we were being approached by a lot of technologies with great fair payment ideas, fair payment integration, getting to open payment. And that seemed like an area ripe for technological innovation, right? But there were no circumstances under which we were going to be successful in that regard because of the way that the organization was structured, because of the way LA Metro was structured. The folks who were in charge of fair payment were not particularly interested in new technologies. They're not interested in co-creating those new technologies. And no matter how much we may have tried, we weren't going to get anywhere. And so part of what I talk about in the book is that there can be the greatest new technology idea you ever heard of, and with a great justification for it, with lots of benefits. But if you're fighting against a fiefdom that is completely walled off, you're never going to win that battle. And so part of one of the big lessons I have in the book is about anyone who's looking to make change is you have to pick your battles, but you also have to win them. So it's not just pick your battles, it's pick your battles and win them, because you can pick the right battle, but if you lose, you will lose credibility as someone who's able to actually get things done, and people won't believe you're going to be able to win next time, and they'll be able to fight you easier. And so you have to figure out, okay, where am I likely to have success? And then make sure that you're going to be successful on that particular endeavor.
I want to, just for the fun of getting into the trenches a little bit, if you can expand just on a kind of battle that in retrospect you think, looking back, this was not maybe worth the investment, and then a battle that you feel, I'm very glad that we staked our claim, and despite the cost, it was worth kind of fighting through it.
Yeah, I mean, so I would articulate that one of the battles that I really cared passionately about and that I'm very proud that we fought was to try to get a PDA, or a pre-development agreement for a public-private partnership on the Sepulveda Transit Corridor, which allows the private sector to develop strategies for how they could potentially solve the problem of getting people from the valley to the west side using rail transit, but not limited by specific rail transit technologies and allowing the private sector to compete for that, which is still ongoing and unfortunately taking a lot longer than I would have liked. But I'm still very proud that we fought that battle because it took years, literally a couple of years, to get everyone in Metro on the same page about the idea that we were going to do this, because it was a thing that hadn't been done before. No one had used a PDA, much less a competitive two-firm PDA, to develop a new rail transit project in this country. And so people were very nervous about it, understandably, and it took a couple of years of bringing them along to do it, but I think it was absolutely well worth it. Now, in terms of battles that I picked that I wish I hadn't, there's like too long of a list to go over because there was like one of the things that I talk about this in the book is that because we were named the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, there was tremendous pressure on us to show results, right? And the chair of the board of Metro, when I first sat down with him to talk about this, said to me very explicitly, "You don't have 2 years." So I was not in a position to sit there and think like, oh, which battle is the right one? You know, I had to start like just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And there were a lot of things like the fair payment issue that I wasted a lot of time on. There was something, I don't know if I mentioned in the book, but there was something called a cash counting machine, which was.
Let's hear about that.
Oh,
you did not mention it in the book. I can tell you that.
Okay, so much fun. It was like some guy had an idea for a machine that would count cash for Metro. I don't know if you know this, but LA Metro spends a lot of money paying people to count cash. Because that is the only way they figured out how to do it. And he was like, I know, I've got a machine that's going to count the cash and save you a ton of money. And we said, okay, let's see it. And he kept saying, oh, it's a month away, or we're almost there. And like, now we can test it. And then we tested it and it didn't work. And like, so we spent a lot of time on a cash counting machine, which probably was not time well spent.
That feels symbolic, maybe in a broader way, but it's funny that you mentioned the sort of like urgency of some of the projects that you were working on, because one of the things that you worked on was congestion pricing, which in some ways, obviously, there is a lot of urgency, but it is also the ultimate like long-term, will we ever get to full congestion pricing? Obviously, there is now congestion pricing in New York City, and that's by all accounts been pretty successful, I would say. But what do you think, what were the sort of like design roadblocks when you were thinking about congestion pricing? Obviously there are political roadblocks, but what were the key political roadblocks thinking about it? And then what do you think, obviously it's not yet imposed in LA, like what are the obstacles now?
Well, so when I took the job as Chief Innovation Officer, before I did that, I was actually on vacation with my family, and I had to fly out from my vacation in Delaware all the way across the country to come talk to Phil Washington, decide if I wanted the job. And one of the things I said to him, here are 4 ideas I have for what I want to do in LA. And I figured if he was open to that, I would take the job. And he said yes to all 4 of them. And one of them was congestion pricing. And so I knew from the beginning that it was something I wanted to do when I got here. But the problem was that you can't just like leap into job on day one in Los Angeles and be like, okay, now let's see if we can price the roads. But we did find a political opening, and I think this is a really instructive story, because what happened was the board of directors at Metro was very consumed with 28 by 28, which some of you may remember, and which, of course, is not going to be 28 by 28. But at the time, they were concerned that this was not going to move forward as quickly as they wanted, and they were looking for ideas about how that could potentially move forward faster, and where could we find the money to finance this array of projects faster. And that was a great opportunity to come in and say, well, we've got an idea that can generate revenue. And interestingly, what they said was, oh, no, we didn't mean that. But,
never mean that.
But you can study it. And so they did let us study it. And I think the idea of even studying congestion pricing for Los Angeles at that time was very controversial, and I think faced a lot of obstacles. Unfortunately, the leadership that we had behind that congestion pricing work was largely based in the mayor's office. And with a new mayor coming in whose priorities are not around transportation, frankly, much less congestion pricing, it's very hard to sustain that. So I think the lesson there is that you have, and this is well known in public policy literature, like you have a window of time in which to get things done, and that window is open for a time that you may not know how long it's going to last. We were in a window of time where we did get a lot of great stuff done, but it closed before we got that one done, and that's just the way things go sometimes.
Speaking of windows, so we have, give or take 2 years until LA 28. And that is imposing, obviously, a good amount of urgency in a range of different projects. And I think as a kind of lightning round final question, I'm curious, like, if you got to pick one project that you could expedite with the urgency of LA 28 within the LA region, that like to bring innovation to bear, what would you choose?
Well, I mean, I think, again, and this is where I focus. I know that I'm at a technology conference. I'm very aware.
And it has to involve technology.
But technology is a tool by which we can achieve greater public policy outcomes. It is not the goal, right? And there are technology tools that I might think are useful, but my answer is that if you really care about transportation and congestion, and you really care about helping low-income people, and you really care about trying to get mobility to work, you have to introduce congestion pricing. The question is, how do you do it? And I've become more and more convinced that the way that you introduce congestion pricing for the Olympics and for anywhere else in Los Angeles is to do it at LAX, because LAX is a closed loop. There is plenty of opportunity to do congestion there. You're not necessarily punishing low-income people at all, and you have an opportunity to demonstrate to the region how this technology can benefit everyone. I think it would be a tremendous experiment and well worth doing ahead of the Olympics.
Well, it's worth trying things where they can't already get worse. So I like that idea. Thank you, Joshua, for talking. And yeah, looking forward to the book.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.